And you, the intelligent, educated attorney, standing in front of it, you're not even aware that it was turned on. You think that you're making a decision when you're not. You are executing a pattern, and the decision was already made for you before you realize it. Hi, this is Andreea Parc. Have you ever wondered why you keep making the same decision and you end up in the same sort of circumstances? This is the discussion that we're gonna have in this episode. You know, there is a specific kind of shame that attorneys carry quietly. And I speak from personal experience, having lived through this. It is this shame of knowing the rules, knowing it clearly, and still doing against the rule anyway. And that builds an unconscious shame that a lot of us carry, also unconsciously. You told yourself over and over again that it will be different this time, that you will catch yourself before you make the same decision, yet you find yourself suffering the consequences of the same decision, and you find yourself back in the same place. And let me tell you something to take the weight off your chest. It was not your decision, and I'll explain in a minute why. I'm a former New York attorney, as many of you know. I'm an author and a speaker on the psychology of ethical failure. I was one of the 12 attorneys among approximately 180 women incarcerated at the Danbury Federal Correction Institution at the camp, which is the lowest security. And I didn't get to Danbury because I didn't know the rules. And the same story goes for the other 11 attorneys that were there. We got in the situation because we didn't understand our patterns. And how to understand the patterns and what to do about it, it's the subject of today's episode. I asked myself several times, every year, the legal profession invests an enormous amount of money and resources in ethics education. Rules of professional conduct, CLE requirements, law school courses, bar materials, all of it to ensure that the attorneys know what is right and what is wrong, what they can do and what rules to follow and what it's not allowed to do. It's a no-no. And the attorneys know. And knowing the rules is not a problem. The problem is catching yourself in the moment before the rule is about to be broken. And knowing the rules and knowing when to catch yourself, they're two different cognitive skills. And unfortunately, from my personal experience, only one of those skills is taught most of the times. Why do intelligent, educated, ethically trained professionals, people who have read the rules, known the rules, passed the bar, built careers in this profession, keep making the same decision? Not once, not by accident, the same decision in the same circumstances or different circumstances, but with the same justification, despite the outcome that they know is coming. And the answer, again, to lift the weight of your chest, is not you making the decision. It's not that you are weak. It's not that you are ignorant. It's that you are on autopilot and you didn't consciously make the choice. The choice was made for you before you realized it. and I make a parallel with the machinery or the car. And I want you to think of an industrial machinery or simply a vehicle, right? Let's think of a conveyor belt or a press or an automatic system. Modern machinery doesn't wait for a human to tell them when to start. It has sensors that they were programmed into the machinery by a human before. And a sensor detects a specific condition, for example, a weight on the belt or a door closing or the temperature changing, or even at the car when the rain starts, right? Windshield wipers automatically start. Right? So the moment that condition is met, the machinery starts automatically without asking anyone, without a separate decision, without asking that the moment is right, because it has been programmed. The sensor fires, the machine responds every time. This is how it works. Now, what if I tell you that your decision making works in the same way? It's a mechanism. Human beings, and attorneys included, have neural pathways that function exactly like those sensors. Psychologists call them triggers. Neuroscientists call them conditioned responses. Behavioral science sometimes call them automatic processes. I call them the machinery inside you that runs without your permission, because this is what it is. Now, you would ask, how would the sensors get installed in me, a human? Here's how it works. At some point in your past, it could be childhood, it could be first year of law school, it could be first year of practice, one moment when you encountered a situation that produced a very strong emotional response that got imprinted, programmed into your body. Fear, shame, danger, and your brain, whose primary job is to keep you safe and alive and out of pain, took note. And now, every time something similar happens, the pathway fires, and the machine doesn't need the full situation to fire. It needs just a fragment of it. A tone of a voice, a particular type of client, or a financial pressure, a feeling of being cornered or that you're not safe, a relationship dynamic that resembles something in your past, in your childhood, for example. And now, in the present moment, that sensor detects that fragment, and it's enough for the machine to start. And you, the intelligent, educated attorney, standing in front of it, you're not even aware that it was turned on. You think that you're making a decision when you're not. You are executing a pattern, and the decision was already made for you before you realize it. What this looks like for attorneys, let me be specific, because this is not abstract. I'm going to give you 3 examples. The first one, an attorney who grew up in a household where money was tight, has a sensor calibrated to financial threat. So when a client signals they might not hire them, or they might fire them, or they have bills piled up to be paid, that sensor fires. And the machinery says, hold on, we have this under control. We find a way to make this work. I cannot afford to lose this client. And the attorney tells himself it is a professional judgment. that the clients need him, that they can manage the conflict, that it's not that serious, that he can win this case. And he knows the rule on conflicts of interest. He knows the rules of professional conduct. He has known this for 10, 20 years since he's been practicing. The rule is not a problem. The censor is the problem that did not see it before the censor fired, before the trigger. He wasn't aware of his pattern of thought. The second attorney, second example. She's been trained early in her career that showing up as uncertain or vulnerable was a weakness, and that every good attorney has answers, and that clients need confidence, not questions. And she always has the answers. And her sensor is calibrated to the feeling of and the fear of not knowing. And when a case moves in a territory that she might not know or she hasn't practiced, instead of acknowledging her limits and asking peers for help, the machinery starts. She tells herself she will find a way. She doesn't need anyone to see that she is uncertain or that she doesn't know. And she is competent and she knows well what she needs to do. She knows the rules. However, the censor fires anyway. The third attorney. He watched his mentor since he came out of law school and started practicing. His mentor always cut corners. His mentor was very successful and nothing ever happened to him. And also the efficiency was rewarded. And his censor learned that speed is safe, corners are negotiable, and nothing happens when you do that. He doesn't think of himself as someone who cuts corners. He thinks of himself as someone who's practical, experienced, efficient, until too many corners are cut and too much of the corners were cut. From the inside, he sees it as experience, efficiency, success, but from the outside, it's ethical violation or even fraud. These are not bad attorneys. These are not attorneys who are disregarding the rules intentionally. They are attorneys with unexamined censors. They don't know when their trigger's fired and the decision was already made. There is a sequence, and understanding this sequence is the solution to every problem and to this whole game in life and in the legal industry. It's thought, emotion, identity, action. First comes the thought. It's a perception, an interpretation. The attorney tells himself, this client might not hire me. This client might fire me. This shortcut is easy to do. The thought produces an emotion: anxiety, shame, relief. The emotion activates identity. I am the attorney who always finds a way. I am the attorney who is confident no matter what happens. I am the attorney who always gets the results. And identity drives the action. By the time you act, the sequence already has run. And what looks like a decision to you was a chain reaction. And what I call pattern literacy means learning to catch the chain reaction at the thought level before it becomes emotion and before it locks into identity and before the action is already done. You might ask why the rules don't stop the machine. Well, the hard truth is that by the time the pattern fires, the rational mind is no longer in charge. And neuroscience has been telling us this for decades. When an emotional trigger activates, the body moves faster than the conscious thought. Because that emotion that I mentioned earlier is imprinted in the body. And the physiological response comes first. The rationalization comes second. And this rationalization is what it sounds like. Rational, articulate, convincing, especially to yourself. And this is why a rule doesn't stop the machine, because you don't violate the rule because you forgot the rule or you didn't learn the rule. You violate it because by the time the machine is running, your brain has already constructed a version of events in which what you are doing is not a violation. You tell yourself, this situation is different. This client is different. I'll fix it. No one is being harmed in this. Sounds familiar? It does to me. And that is not reasoning. That is the machine talking. The rationalization that gets into your mind immediately if you don't learn how to stop it. And the solution to this is what I call pattern literacy. And it's the capacity to learn to catch yourself at the thought level. And this is not what we've been taught in law school and at all the bar programs that we took. And it's what I had learned at a cost I would not wish on anyone. And the good news here is that you can learn to read your own sensors. And not to eliminate them, because the machine keeps running and the machine doesn't disappear, but you can learn to observe it. You can learn to read it. You can learn to see it. And that moment when you can observe it, you have a window. It's a short window, but you have a window when you can choose something different. And as I said, I call this pattern literacy. It's the ability to recognize and learn how to recognize and how to see your own automatic responses to the triggers before they become action. And there are 3 steps. Step number 1 is identify your sensor conditions. And specifically, what type of conditions trigger your sensor? For example, what kind of client situation make you feel pressured? What circumstances produces the urge to take an action immediately? What kind of financial pressure makes the rules flexible or make you cut corners? What relationship dynamic? For example, a demanding client, a dismissive partner, a threatening adversary. What is it that activates something in your body and your mind that is older that your legal career. You know the answers. You always have known the answers. You have simply not stopped to analyze them or even write them down. And that's what I'm asking you to do now, to take a break and to analyze and write down your conditions. Step 2, learn what the machine feels like when it starts. As we said, the body knows first. So the body tells you before the mind does. So for most people, it's a feeling. For me, it was a feeling. A feeling that something is not right. That gut feeling, you can feel it in your heart. It's paradoxically, sometimes it feels like clarity. That knowing, that absolute clarity, that of course, that's obviously what I have to do. And that feeling of course, this is obviously the only option, that is not your wisdom or your intuition. That is the machine talking. That is the trigger that was pulled in that moment. Learning your physical signal, learning where to feel it, and how it feels in your chest, in your jaw, in your gut, that is the key. That signal is your early warning system. And it's more reliable than any rule that you will ever learn. And step 3, pause. Insert a pause before the decision completes. And as I said, take a break. Stop for a second. Ask yourself a simple question. Is this a decision that I'm making, a conscious decision? Or is the pattern speaking? You don't need to wait for the answer. The only thing that you need is to stop and to invite awareness. You don't need to stop the machinery. You just need to introduce a moment of observation between the sensor firing and the action completing. And in that moment, you're no longer on autopilot. That decision is not already made for you. You are back in the driver's seat and you have a moment and you are capable of making a different decision. I was not able to identify my sensor condition before I was sitting inside the consequences. I was able to identify them after. Some of the attorneys could map exactly the triggers and the conditions, but for me, it was too late. And what I'm here to do is to share my experience so other attorneys skip this part and go straight to pattern literacy and learning how to catch their patterns and at the thought level. The legal profession spends millions of dollars in teaching attorneys the rules. However, very few attorneys recognize the moment before the rule is about to break. And very few teach how to do that. And that is the gap. And that is where real ethics education lives. And this is a conversation I'm committed to having in this podcast, in speaking rooms, in law schools, and bar associations for as long as it takes. If you liked this episode, please share it with another attorney who you think might need to hear this. Not because they're at risk, but because this work is for the attorneys who are paying attention, for the attorneys who want to understand themselves, who want to be aware of themselves, not just their obligations and their responsibilities as attorneys.